Those who knew someone who went missing, what happened? My cousin disappeared along with his car, leaving behind a large blood stain in his apartment. Right from the start his roommates were suspects, but several years passed and his body was still missing. The case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries or America's Most Wanted or one of those, and a tip came in giving the location of his car in a nearby river. His body was found in the trunk, and the roommates confessed and went to prison. A friend went missing one night in June 2016 after a night out. He had an argument with his so and wandered off on foot. Days went by, and there was no info. Find out, he'd somehow been hit by a car, and died. He didn't have his wallet on him, so it took a bit for them to identify his body. No one understood how his significant other wasn't with him, or what led up to him walking off in what I think was a drunken state. A family friend went to a Metallica concert. During intermission she went out to have a cigarette and the venue wouldn't let her back in. There's footage of her walking through the parking lot and then she wasn't seen again. They ended up finding her body a year or so later, and through DNA, connected it to another rape/murder. Because of that DNA they found the guy who did it. It was awful. Morgan was her name and she was beautiful and talented and had her whole life ahead of her. Not me, but a poor old guy at Costco. This old guy, maybe late 60s, came up to me and said, "Jimmy, is that you?" I said no. His face sank. I talked to him for a bit. Apparently his adult grandson Jimmy vanished a few years before and I looked just like him. He said the family had no idea where he is and hadn't seen him in years. He just up and moved away without telling anyone. The guy didn't seem like he had dementia or anything, just a grandfather looking for his grandson. This was a few years ago. I felt really bad for the guy. His heart probably got super excited only to be broken again when I wasn't Jimmy. I hope Jimmy eventually contacted his family because his grandfather seemed really sad about it. I went to the same elementary school as Michael Dunahy. He was kidnapped off the playground and still not found to this day. I remember after it happened every parent showed up to walk the entire school of kids home. I also remember running ahead of the pack for whatever reason and all the parents were screaming at me to get back. They were terrified. My great-grandfather disappeared when his youngest child was a toddler. Records were finally found, decades later, showing he had moved across the county, changed his name, remarried, and had additional kids. Guy I went to school with and kind of grew up around, went missing in 2010 on his way home. Police and search parties searched everywhere looking for him and his truck. He had to pass over a bridge to get to his house, so it should be noted that the lakes were searched by divers and dragging the lake as well. 4 years later, 2014, the water levels were very low and someone called in saying they saw a tire sticking out of the surface of the water near the bridge he would have had to cross to get home. It was him and his truck. At least the family got some closure after 4 long, excruciating years. A friend from high school. She was skiing and got separated from her party during the day. Sadly she was found deceased in a tree well. She died at 19. I still think of her often. She was such a bright light and had an amazing future. A few years ago a kid at the local high school, Caleb, went missing after borrowing a truck from a family friend, Ricky. According to Ricky, the truck showed backup with money tied to the steering wheel. Later young men in the town came forward and said they had been molested by Ricky when they were in their teens. Police seized a computer of Ricky's and found pornographic images of Caleb on it. Ricky has been arrested and will die in prison. He won't tell police or the family where Caleb is. Caleb Deal. My brother's middle school teacher. He just didn't show up to school one day, which was very unusual. The school scrambled to find a substitute for him, because they had no notice. We had a whole school meeting like 2 days later when he was officially missing, where they told us all about it. He left the house that morning as usual, according to his wife later said. He was never seen again. Many search parties were organized, and people looked for months, but they never found him. He is still officially missing today. Around July of 2022, an old high school classmate of mine went missing. She was a mother of 2 boys, one of them with special needs. The last known contact she had with anyone was when she told a friend of hers she was going to the store, but she never returned. The police were informed, and a missing persons report was filed. Her phone and wallet were found at her home. A boyfriend she was dating was questioned and released without any indication of foul play. She's never been seen or heard from since. My cousin was in a horrible car accident and the hospital miscommunicated with the police and his name was given incorrectly. He was missing for a week. A childhood family friend had a head injury from a BMX accident, and was most likely suffering from concussion or post-concussion symptoms. Went off into the wilderness, and his remains were found 3 years later. His dad spearheaded the search effort during those years. I think overall not knowing exactly what happened was hard, but finding his remains and getting to bring them home was really great closure. This was my friend's brother. He disappeared and his apartment had blood everywhere, as if from a struggle or suicide attempt. Years later he showed up on his brother's doorstep and said he had been off living as a shaman somewhere. Who knows how accurate that is? Debbie Moberg, age 16. The first story was that she ran away. But the stepdad couldn't keep his story straight. 2 days later they talked to her 7-year-old sister, who reported the stepdad carrying her out of the house wrapped in a blanket. He actually took the little sister with to dump the body. It took 3 months of jail before he confessed to murdering her. He had been molesting her for years. She stood up to him when he shifted to the little sister. He had put her body in a commercial dumpster, which in turn was emptied at the city landfill. Landfill personnel did spend several weeks combing the area, but no luck. So her last place is sort of known, but her body never properly found. I was 8 and she was 2. The town searched for her for like 2 weeks, finding nothing. The mother of the son called the cops about a strange smell coming from his room. They found her in, edits under, his, waterbed, mattress. Her grave is right next to my grandfather's. So also an often reminder. Matty Clifton, rest in peace. He ended up on the other side of the country, started a new life, and died 30 years later. He had schizophrenia. The family didn't know where he was all those years. My cousin was kidnapped on her way to school. It was over 20 years ago and she's not been found. They went on a wilderness hiking trip alone in Hawaii. They never came home. No body was ever found. As it turns out, this has happened in Hawaii to quite a few people over the years. I guess it is a more dangerous region than people generally understand. A friend of mine's sister went missing in the early 80s. We always suspected she was a victim of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer. We found out a couple of years ago that she is in fact on his list of suspected victims. When I was a kid, a friend of mine was kidnapped by his dad. The mom got custody and the dad just showed up one day and took him. It was devastating for everyone, especially the mom and brother. After about 5 years of police investigations and the mom having to change her legal name and go into hiding, they finally found him and got him back home. He was safe, but he was really quiet for a few years after he got back. I have no idea what happened during that time. What I do know is that he seems incredibly well adjusted now, and last I heard he's happily married. A neighbor's son vanished while jogging in our neighborhood. He was an avid runner and it was unlike him to not come back on time. Days turned into a frantic search involving the entire community. Unfortunately, his body was found in a nearby river. An investigation revealed he had been struck by a hit-and-run driver and his body was dumped to hide the crime. The perpetrator was eventually caught, but it was a devastating loss for his family. Guy in my town went missing. Older gentleman, his family said he took off walking with a gun. They found him just under a year later by some railroad tracks with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. The family suffered that whole time.